Okay, we're on chapter 9 of. It's the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, chapter 9. It's written by Frederick Douglass, his autobiography. All right, chapter 9 proceeds. I've now reached a period of my life when I can give dates. I left Baltimore and went to live with Master Thomas Auld at St. Michael's on March 1832. In March 1832. It was now more than 7 years since I lived with him in the family of my old master on Colonel Lloyd's plantation. We, of course, were now almost entire strangers to each other. He was to me a new master, and I was to him a new slave. I was ignorant of his temper and disposition. He was equally so of mine. A very short time, however, brought us into full acquaintance with each other. I was made acquainted with his wife not less than with himself. They were well matched, being equally mean and cruel. I was now, for the first time during a space of more than 7 years, made to feel the painful gnawings of hunger, a something which I had not experienced before since I left Colonel Lloyd's plantation. I went hard enough with me since then, when I could look back to no period at which I had enjoyed a sufficiency. It was tenfold harder after living in Master Hugh's family, where I had always had enough to eat, and of that which was good. I've said Master Thomas was a mean man. He was so. Not to give a slave enough to eat is regarded as the most aggravated development of meanness, even among slaveholders. The rule is, no matter how coarse the food, only let there be enough of it. This is the theory, and in the past, and in the part of Maryland from which I came, it was general practice. Though there are many exceptions, Master Thomas gave us enough of neither coarse nor fine food. There was 4 slaves of us in the kitchen, my sister Eliza, my aunt Priscilla, Henny, and myself, and we were allowed less than half a bushel of cornmeal per week, and very little else, either in the shape of meat or vegetables. It was not enough for us to subsist upon. We were therefore reduced to the wretched necessity of living at the expense of our neighbors. This we did by begging and stealing, whichever came handy in a time of need, the one being considered as legitimate as the other. A great many times have we poor creatures been nearly perishing with hunger, when food in abundance lay mouldering in the safe smoke-house, and our pious mistress was aware of that fact. And yet that mistress and her husband would kneel every morning and pray that God would bless them in basket and store. Bad as all slaveholders are, we seldom meet one destitute of every element of character commanding respect. My master was one of this rare sort. I do not know of one single noble act ever performed by him. The leading trait in his character was meanness, and if there were any other element in his nature, it was made subject to this. He was mean, and like most other mean men, he lacked the ability to conceal his meanness. Captain Auld was not born a slaveholder. He had been a poor man, master only of a bay craft. He came into possession of all his slaves by marriage, and of all men, adopted slaveholders are the worst. He was cruel but cowardly. He commanded without firmness. In the enforcement of his rule, he was at times rigid and at times lax. At times he spoke of his slaves with the firmness of Napoleon. That is. Sorry, I was thinking about ice cream. He spoke of his slaves with the firmness of Napoleon and the fury of a demon. At other times, he might well be mistaken for an inquirer who had lost his way. He did nothing of himself. He might have passed for a lion, but for his ears. He might have passed for a lion, but for his ears. In all things noble which he attempted, his own meanness shone most conspicuous. His airs, words, and actions were the airs, words, and actions of born slaveholders, and being assumed, were awkward enough. He was not even a good imitator. He possessed all the disposition to deceive, but wanted the power. Having no resources within himself, he was compelled to be the copyist of many, and being such, he was forever the victim of inconsistency. And of consequence, he was an object of contempt, and was held as such even by his slaves. The luxury of having slaves of his own to wait upon him was something new and unprepared for. He was a slaveholder without the ability to hold slaves. He found himself incapable of managing his slaves, either by force, fear, or fraud. We seldom called him master. We generally called him Captain Auld, and were hardly disposed to title him at all. I doubt not that our conduct had much to do with making him appear awkward, and of consequence fretful. Our want of reverence for him must have perplexed him greatly. He wished to have us all call him master, but lacked the firmness necessary to command us to do so. His wife used to insist upon our calling him so, but to no purpose. In August 1832, my master attended a Methodist camp. Oh, cut my soup off, Avery. Turn it down. I'm sorry. In August 1832, my master attended a Methodist camp meeting, that is, held in by Bayside, Talbot County, and there experienced religion. I indulged a faint hope that his conversion would lead him to emancipate his slaves, and that, if he did not do that, it would at any rate make him more kind and humane. Were you seen on the camera, Avery?
I was walking by, and I tripped over my backpack and fell on the table.
Oh, so now you know why she's behind the black wall. I'm sorry, the black and white wall. Okay, let's continue. I was disappointed in both these respects. It neither made him to be humane to his slaves nor to emancipate them. If it had any effect on his character, it made him more cruel and hateful in all his ways, for I believe him to have been a more worse man after his conversion than before. Prior to his conversion, he relied upon his own depravity to shield and sustain him in his savage barbarity. But after his conversion, he found religion, sanction, and support for his slave-holding cruelty. Ain't that interesting? He made the greatest pretensions to piety. His house was the house of prayer. He prayed morning, noon, and night. He very soon distinguished himself among his brethren and was soon made a class leader and exhorter. A class leader and exhorter. His activity in revivals was great, and he proved himself an instrument in the hands of the church in converting many souls. His house was the preacher's home. They used to take great pleasure in coming there to put up for a while while he starved us, he stuffed them. We have had 3 or 4 preachers there at a time. The names of those who used to come frequently, who lived there, were Mr. Storks, Mr. Erery, E-W-R-E-Y, Mr. Humphrey, and Mr. Hickey. I've also seen Mr. George Cookman at our house. We slaves loved Mr. Cookman. We believed him to be a good man. We thought him instrumental in getting Mr. Samuel Harrison, a very rich slaveholder, to emancipate his slaves, and by some means got the impression that he was laboring to effect the emancipation of all slaves. When he was at our house, we were sure we were sure to be called into prayers. When he was at our house, we were sure to be called into prayers. When the others were there, we were sometimes called in and sometimes not. Mr. Cookman took more notice of us than either of the other ministers. He could not come among us without betraying his sympathy for us, and stupid as we were, we had the sagacity, Sagacity. Why am I thinking that G is a long G? Sagacity, to see it. Let me know what you think. Sagacity. With the city, sati, it makes me think it's sagacity. I'm not real sure. Okay, let's continue. While I lived with my master in St. Michael's, there was a white young man. Why she laugh at that? Okay, anyway. There was a white young man, a Mr. Wilson, who proposed to keep a Sabbath school for the instruction of such slaves as might be disposed to learn to read the New Testament. We met but three times when Mr. West and Mr. Fairbanks, both class leaders, with many others, came upon us with sticks and other missiles, drove us off, and forbade us to meet again. Thus ended our little Sabbath school in the pious town of St. Michael's. I've said my master found religious sanction for his cruelty. As an example, I will state one of many facts going to prove the charge. I've seen him tie up a lame young woman and whip her with a heavy cow skin upon her naked shoulders, causing the warm red blood to drip. And in justification of the bloody deed, he would quote this passage of Scripture: "He that knoweth his master's will, and doeth it not, shall be beaten with many stripes." Turn it down to low, Avery. I hear it boiling.
It's because your thing is still not melted.
Turn it down to low anyway. Master would keep this lacerated young woman tied up in this horrid situation 4 or 5 hours at a time. I've known him to tie her up early in the morning and whip her before breakfast, leave her, go to the store, return at dinner, and whip her again, cutting her in the places already made raw with his cruel lash. The secret of Master's cruelty toward Henny is found in the fact of her being almost helpless. When quite a child, she fell into the fire and burned herself horribly. Her hands were so burnt that she never got to use them. She could do very little but very heavy burdens. She was to master a bill of expense, and as he was a mean man, she was a constant offense to him. He seemed desirous of getting the poor girl out of existence. He gave her away once to his sister, but being a poor gift, she was not disposed to keep her. Finally, my benevolent master, to use his own words, set her adrift to take care of herself. Here was the recently converted man holding on upon the mother and at the same time turning out her helpless child to starve and die. Master Thomas was one of the many pious slaveholders who hold slaves for the very charitable person of taking care of them. Okay, Master Thomas was the good one. Okay. My master and myself had quite a number of differences. He found me unsuitable to his purpose. My city life, he said, had had a very pernicious effect on me. It had almost ruined me for every good purpose and fitted me for everything which was bad. One of my father-in-law's farms, which was about 5 miles from St. Michael's, one of my greatest faults was that of letting his horse run away and go down to his father-in-law's farms, which was about 5 miles from St. Michael's. I would then have to go after it. My reason for this kind of carelessness was that I could always get something to eat when I went there. So he did that on purpose. Master William Hamilton, my master's father-in-law, always gave his slaves enough to eat. I never left there hungry, no matter how great the need of my speedy return. Master Thomas at length said he would stand it no longer. I had lived with him 9 months, during which time he had given me a number of severe whippings, all to no good purpose. He resolved to put me out, as he said, to be broken. And for this purpose, he let me for 1 year of a man's, during which time he had given me a number of severe whippings, all to no good purpose. He resolved to put me out, as he said, to be broken. And for this purpose, he let me for 1 year to a man, he let me, as in lent him out, for 1 year to a man named Edward Covey. Mr. Covey was a poor man, a farm renter. He rented the place upon which he lived, as also the hands with which he tilled it. Mr. Covey had acquired a very high reputation for breaking young slaves, and this reputation was of immense value to him. It enabled him to get his farm tilled with much less expense to himself than he could have had it done without such a reputation. Some slaveholders thought it not much loss to allow Mr. Covey to have their slaves for 1 year for the sake of the training to which they were subjected, without any other compensation. He could hire young help with great ease, in consequence of his reputation. Added to the natural good qualities of Mr. Covey, he was a professor of religion, a pious soul, a member of a class leader in the Methodist Church. All of this added weight to his reputation as a quote-unquote nigger breaker. I was aware of all the facts, having been made acquainted with them by a young man who had lived there. I nevertheless made the change gladly, for I was sure of getting enough to eat, which is not the smallest consideration to a hungry man. The end of chapter 9.